We're going to be covering forms and components. So yesterday we were just working on actually getting our RESTful tasks on the screen, and we got that happening the way that we wanted to. We could also click a button to show an individual task down at the bottom. So now what we want to do is actually be able to create a task from our front end. Because we weren't doing that yet, we were actually sending requests through Postman, but we want our application to be able to take in the input for a new task. All right. So let's basically what we want to do. I've already emptied out our collection, so there are no tasks in there anymore. We're just going to create some stuff from scratch. What are we going to need to have on our page in order to take this stuff in? A form, right? I mean, this is like the typical way that we take in some information. So let me get to my RESTful tasks. Here we go. So inside of our app component.html, let's go ahead and create a little form where we can take in tasks. Maybe I'll do it here at the top. Form. And then inside that form, let's just have some different inputs. We've got, what is this going to be? Title, right? Title. Come down here, do another one for description. Description. And then we also have a third thing that's going to be a Boolean, right? It was the completed flag. So how do we want to do that? Maybe we'll do, oops. I don't want the for. Do you guys know what the for does, by the way? Does anyone know? Yeah, it connects it to the input. So if the input has a specific ID, and I want clicking on the label to actually focus that input, then you could match them together that way. Okay. So here we're going to have an input, but what is our type going to be on this one? No, because this is going to be for the completed part. Radio? Yeah, I mean, I guess a radio is a possibility. I was just thinking a checkbox, though. Right? It's either on or off. Either it's completed or it's not. Okay. And then our name would just be completed. And then, of course, as mentioned, we do need a submit button here. So that's all cool. So normally in the past when we were doing form submissions, we would need these guys up here, right? We would need some kind of action to tell it where do we want this form submission to go. And then we would need a method to say what kind of form submission was it, right? Now we're going to do things a little bit differently because we're doing it all in JavaScript. So rather than sending the regular form submission, we're going to listen for a submit event. Okay? So let's just basically create a some kind of handler that will take a form submission here. So do you guys remember how we listen for an event in Angular? So we're going to use parentheses and then surround the event that we're listening for. Okay? And then we're going to have some kind of handler that deals with that. So we'll just call it handle submit. Do I have a function for that yet? No. Not yet. So I actually need to create one inside my my app.component.ts. So inside here, let's just create handle submit. Okay, and for now I'm just going to console log form was submitted so that we know that it happened. And then let's refresh our page here so that we can see it. Oops. 1000. Okay, so I'll open up my console so that we can see. Make this a little bit bigger. And if I just drop in some title, some disk, did our form actually submit in the old-fashioned way? Did we get our console log? You sure? I think it did log and then it submitted the standard
Then it
way,
refreshed
right?
the page.
Yeah, it actually, you can see it made a
I think you have to do a button that's called submit.
Do you have a form module?
oh, yeah, you're right. So that's the problem. We actually need to bring in the forms module. And you guys may run into this exact same problem where you didn't bring it in and it's like, wait a minute, the form's submitting the way that it would in a typical HTML page. That's what it is. So let's first, before we get back to this, let's go bring in that module. So we have to go to our app.module.ts. And then again, for the things that we need to put those inside of our imports array. So if I say forms module, is it forms module or form module? Forms? Okay. But it won't give me an autocomplete on that guy? Alright. That's terrible. Alright, so forms module. And then is that coming from, I want to say that's coming from core, right? So I could just pull it up here. Module.
I got it from Angular Forms at Angular Forms.
Oh, my bad. Okay, so it's not actually from core then. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, at Angular Forms. Okay, so there we go. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to prevent our form from submitting in the default way that it would normally. So normally that would do what it just did right now. We want to prevent that action. Okay, so let's refresh the page and try this again. Okay, and I'm not even going to put anything in here. We just want to see, okay, so we're getting our console log as expected. So every time I submit this form, we're getting our console log, right? Now what we need to think about is, well, how are we going to get the data from the form and then send it to our backend? Because we need to know what values are in these inputs, right, before we send them to the backend. Anybody know how we're going to do that? Bindings, yes. So what bindings are that Alan's talking about is that we're going to bind some, basically an attribute inside of our class to these specific fields, okay? And we're gonna use something that's actually called two-way binding, which means that the information can flow in both directions. So I can make a change to it in my component.ts, and I can also change it in the HTML of the page as well. So as a person is making changes to that form input, it's changing that data as well. So what does this syntax look like when we're talking about Angular templating? Banana in a box. Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a weird expression. But so basically we've got this box, right? And then we've got the banana inside of it. And then we're going to say ng model. And then we're going to set that equal to some, basically some property. So I'm going to create something in my component.ts that would be, it's just going to be called new task. And it will be an object that has some attributes in it. So it'll have an attribute for a title. It'll also have an attribute for description and also one for completed. Okay. So before we completely flesh out the template a little bit more, let's go back to the component.ts and create that thing. So let's say new task equals an object. Okay. And then I'm going to have some different properties here. So I'll have a title that's going to be blank in the beginning when I first load up the page.
Hey, Morley, can I ask you a question?
Yes, you may.
Section right here. See a few lines up where it says title and equals this cool app.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that from before we wiped everything out of the HTML page?
Yeah, I don't think we're even.
So
let's actually render this on the page so that we see that it's still doing something. So if I go here and I just wanted to output that, I could just go like that, right?
Okay.
So yeah.
But that shouldn't conflict with the title under new task, right?
Nope.
Okay.
Completely different thing. So this is an attribute of the class instance, right? This is going to be an attribute of this particular object.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so let's just make the description blank, and then we'll say completed is false, right? By default. Okay, and then let's go back in here and let's just basically link up the specific properties of that new task object to the individual inputs. Okay, so I have to do the same thing for title here. So let's do banana in the box again. Whoops. So you're going to say ng model, and then it will equal, what's this going to equal, guys, on line 6?
New task.
New task
Dot title.
dot title. Exactly. So we want to link it to that specific key value pair, right? New task dot title. Okay, and then down here we're going to go new task dot description. And then you get the drill. So we'll do the same thing here. This would be new task dot completed.
And this is just the standard to pass data from the form in Angular.
Right. So we're going to give our component.ts access to whatever the form inputs are at the time of submission. So that way, once we have all the data, we can, of course, pass it to our backend to create the new task. Okay. So rather than console logging out that the form was submitted, let's console log what this .new task looks like when the submit button is clicked, right? Okay, so I'll refresh that, and then let's just put some stuff in there, some title, desk, and then if I submit that here, so you can see we have all of the data that we need, right? And if I change this again, say some changed, you see we have reference to all the data that's in the form at that given point in time, so when we actually submit it.
So if you put that object, let's say just above some title in the curly brackets, you put what is it, new task dot title? Would it just
Do you mean here in the component.ts?
not in the component.ts?
Oh, in here.
HTML.
Okay.
If you put that, I guess just above the form in the curly brackets, new task dot title. While you're filling that in, is it gonna fill that in for you, or rather type it out?
If I take it out of the form completely?
No. If you like,
If I moved it up like this, you mean?
oh no. Like if you didn't move anything, but like say just within that div, right over where you have label title,
Okay.
you put a p tag.
The JSON.
Oh, just to like
Yeah,
display
and the
what it
JSON,
looks
yeah.
like? Yeah, we could do that.
Adjust it. Yeah.
Alright, so that's going to be what? New task.title, and then we could use the pipe to do JSON, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just do that. That way we can see what this input is holding at all times, right? That's a good idea. So this is basically showing us how that two-way data binding is working, because I'm making changes inside the input, and you can see it's also changing that specific property of the object on the fly.
Does that mean the name attribute in the input field is now like useless?
It's not well, it doesn't exactly matter what you put in here, but you do need to have something. So if you empty, or let's say we remove this entirely, it's going to cause you some problems. You'll most likely get an error. Let's see. See, you get an error here. So you do need to have a name. But what really matters is the ng model. So what are we binding it to? Yes.
So are you pressing enter when you fill out the
Would
Mhm.
that button work like that?
Yeah, so the button would do the exact same thing because the button is triggering a submission of the entire form. So either way, that way we're listening to the form submit, that will catch both a button click and somebody pressing enter inside the input.
What if I have two buttons? One is submit, the other one is cancel. And how does it know like which one is the submit?
So what you could do is if I want the second button to not submit, if I wanted to do something else, cancel. I could specify a type of button, and that would make it not do the default form submission. So here, if I create this and I just press cancel, notice how we're not getting any logs in there. So that's not submitting the form. Okay. So the next step in the process, we've got a way to actually get all the data that's in those inputs. All we really need to do is send that stuff to the back end, right? What's the flow of the information though? Because we are using a service. Where's it going to go first?
Got hit our component.ts and then to the HTTP.
So yeah, it's going to hit the component.ts, and then we're going to be using the service to make that AJAX request on our behalf, right? And then we're going to subscribe to it inside of our component so that we can update our list of tasks. All right. All right. So right now our service doesn't yet have a method to create a new task. Let's make one, right? So we'll say create task, and then what am I going to take in for my create task method? Yeah, sure. We'll just call it a task, right? So these are the things that are coming from our form inputs. All right. And then what do I want to do with that? I'm going to send it to the API. Yes, exactly. So let's do a return. And what kind of request is this going to be? Post request. So we'll send a post request, and that's just going to go to the same route here. It's going to go to API/tasks. And the reason why we're seeing red here is because a post request is going to require that we pass along some data with it. So let's add that as well. Take the task there. Okay. And then in my component, I can actually subscribe to this. And then when it comes back, what am I expecting to see? Yeah, I'm expecting to see a new task. Exactly. So in the component, when we do the form submission, all we need to do is we need to call that method of our service and then pass it this.newTask. So we'll go this.http create task, and then I'm going to pass it what again? This.newTask. Okay, and then I always want to subscribe to this because when I get a response back from my server, it's going to have the brand new task for me. So let's say data, and we're going to say that it's any so that TypeScript doesn't get angry. And then here, what do I want to do once I have my new task?
Print it.
All right, let's do that. Console.log data. All right, so let's create a new task. Refresh this here. Let's say get black belt study hard completed now. All right, here we go. So we got our log, right? And it shows us the new task. Everything looks the way that it should. So rather than doing this, I actually want to update my page with that new task as well. What would be a simple way of doing that? Say it again?
Task, and you call your get all tasks function.
Yeah, I could do that. I mean, that would be. Just think about it this though. I'm making another HTTP request. Do I really even need to do that?
Add it
You
to
could
the
just
array.
append it to your.
I can just add it to the tasks array, right? Okay. Now, keep in mind that if we did have some sort of specific ordering going on in here, there may be a reason why you would make that an extra HTTP request. But in this case, I just want to add it to the end of my list, my array. Okay, so let's add some logic to actually do that. So we can just say this.tasks.push data.task. Okay. And I know there's occasionally some confusion about what data is giving you back. This is entirely dependent on your backend. So if your backend just simply sends back the task as is, as one object, then you wouldn't say data.task, you would just say data, right? If you nest it inside of an object, though, in the way that I am, then you would want to say data.task. And part of the reason why I'm doing that is just so that I can do error checking. So later on, if we're doing validations and we want to see, did this thing go through properly, I can check to see, does my object have an error property on it? Or like if I could check to see, is the status error or something like that. Right? So this should work the way that we want it. Let's refresh this real quick. Create a new task. So again, we've got our get black belt task. Let's say eat lunch. Yum. Okay, and then when I submitted that, you see it instantly just added it to the bottom of my list because I pushed to that tasks array.
Isn't the danger with that though, if it fails downstream, that your data would be out of sync then? Right, so if you hit the service and it fails like the insert in the database, then you're gonna have the delta in the data in your component and in your backend.
Right, so this question came up recently, and actually, when you subscribe, you can also check to see if there was an error. So we could do something like this. That's what it was, right, Josh? The error was the second argument in the subscribe callback?
Yeah. And then there's a third argument that you can put in, but I forgot what it was.
Yeah, what was that third argument? And why is it redlining it? No overload matches this call.
Oh, because you've got your, the error has to be, doesn't it have to be after your data there? No?
Well, that's where I put it. I put it as the second argument here. Isn't that how you did it the other day, though?
It doesn't do promises the same way as,
Wait. Check for error. Yeah, I believe it was the second argument of the subscribe callback, though.
because I haven't been using, I haven't even been putting the third argument.
Error handling.
We could talk about it separately. So essentially it'll.
Yeah, so basically the idea is that if you have this second argument there, an error argument, you could check to see, was there an error? If there was, then obviously you're not going to do the push, right?
To push to the component.
Yeah, we wouldn't push to our tasks array because something bad happened,
You
right?
essentially wait for the backend to do validation and send a response, and then you hit the component.
Yeah, because as you can see here, we're only doing anything once we got our information back. We're only doing it inside of our subscribe callback.
I encountered this thing, but I wasn't passing in my data in another object. It was just data, so I was just saying if data is equal to the error, then don't push. Otherwise, push.
I think the way I did it with the arrow is I did data and then the arrow and what it does and then comma error and then what to do if it comes back.
Oh, it was an actual second callback.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. I think that's probably correct. Yeah, so we could create a separate. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, so if we add a second callback to this, that second callback would be the error callback. So what happens if there's, say, like a network failure or something like that? So in other words, if the first callback runs, what that means is that at least we successfully made our call to our backend. However, something could have gone wrong on the back end, so what if it didn't validate? We might have gotten an error when we tried to insert it into Mongo, in which case we can pass that back to our client as part of our response object. So we could say, what was the status? The status was an error. So there are two kind of possible things. You can either have an error that happened in the back end when you're trying to insert it into the database, or there could be something larger like a network error where the request just didn't even complete at all.
And if you don't put that in, you just get a bit like your console log on the
Turns red.
Yeah, you just get a big red.
Because then it's like an unhandled exception. Yeah.
So that subscribe is only the handoff to the server, essentially.
So the subscribe is basically, it allows us to do a couple things. We can see, did we get a proper response back from the server? And then if we add that second callback, the second callback would be, no, we didn't get a proper response back, something wrong happened. Okay? So there are two possible errors. Either maybe there was some error in the network connectivity, in which case we'd end up in that second callback. Or if it was just an error in inserting something into Mongo in our backend, we would have that would still be in the success callback, but we would have to do some extra checking in there. So we'd say something like, if data.status equals error, then we would know that maybe there was an error, right? And we would have to send that from our backend as well. So I don't think we currently have any logic to do that, but if I were to add something like that to the backend, so inside of our controller, where was our create? So our create's up here. So yeah, I mean, we kind of have something. So we could just say, if the response that we get back has this property error, that means that something went wrong in inserting it into Mongo, right? So for now, we're not going to do the secondary callback, but that's what that would be for if you had like some network connectivity issues. And you'd probably never have that with your own personal projects here because our API is running on our computer, so it's sort of like communicating with itself, right? We're not actually going through the internet to make these requests. And that's one of the reasons why they're so fast, too. We don't have to reach out to some service. Okay? Any questions about what we did here? The form submission or or just adding it to our tasks array? Does that make sense to you guys? So I want to make sure that this part makes sense before we move on to the components. Thumbs all around? Good? Good. Billy? Up? You're wavering? All right, you're wavering. What's your clarification?
Oh no, it's like happy.
Oh, it's a happy thumb. All right. Better that than an angry thumb.
Yeah.
All right. Good deal. So that's how we can create a new task. Let's talk a little bit about subcomponents because so far we've had everything in one component, right? We just got it in this app.component.ts. What if we wanted to create a subcomponent? So if I just want to create a component for, and let's look at what we're going to do. So here, remember we had this little thing down at the bottom where we can view an individual task? What if I wanted that to be its own component? Because say, I want to reuse this on some different parts of my app or something, or I want to have this in different routes. I can create this reusable component that can be used in multiple places. So it becomes very nice for code reuse. I don't have to rewrite this show task component, because now I just have one that I can call on whenever I want to do whenever I want to show a task. So to create a new component, what are we going to use? Yeah, NGGC, exactly. So we're going to again revisit the Angular command line interface so that we can create a second component. So let's do ng, and then again you can shorten this to just G. I'm going to do it all long so that you guys can see it, but basically ng generate component means I want to generate a new component, or you can do nggc if you want to be a little bit shorter with it. And then we'll just call this, I don't know, show task.
What does NG stand?
Angular.
Oh.
It is the second and third letter of Angular. Okay, cool. So we created a new component, and you guys can see that it was nested inside of our app. And then again, we get all these same files that we got for our app component. We've got a test file, we've got the actual HTML template, we also have a CSS file, and then we also have our component.ts file. Cool. All right, so what we want this to look like is basically we want it to look like the way that it does currently. So all we've got is this right here, right? I'm just going to grab this. And then inside of our new component, so in the HTML here, you see they're saying show task works. I'm going to change that and put our HTML here. Okay. Now to make this work, what I need to do is use something called input. So what input does is it allows us to accept some information from whatever component is rendering this subcomponent. Okay. So let's call it, I need to create this up here. I can say something like input, and then I need to call it something. We'll just call it selected. Actually, is that what I called it in there? Active task. Yeah, let's call it active task. Oops. Did that do the import for it? Oh, it did. Nice. Okay. So notice how we got another import up here. It's bringing in input, and that's coming from Angular core. Okay. And you'll see that it has an @ symbol in front of it. This is what's called a decorator, and we saw those a little bit in Python as well. So back in Flash when we were doing app.route, right? So this will enable our subcomponent, our show task component, to actually take in an active task. And then when we take that in, our show task component is just going to show these things. All right? So inside of our app component, let's change this a little bit. And just get rid of this here. So instead of a div element, what we're gonna render is going to be show task. And let's see what the selector is. So here, if you guys see, inside the show task component, it tells us how do we reference it inside of our templates. We can reference it with app-show-task. I can change that too if I want. So if I just wanted to call this show task, I can get rid of that part. And now inside of my template, I can reference it as show task. So let's say show task. And then we only want to show that if there's an active task. And then let's end it too. And then what else do I need to give this show task component? I need to give it the active task, right? So this is how we bind a specific attribute. We just use these square brackets like that. So we could say active task, oops, equals the active task. All right. So let's just demo this real quick, make sure it's working the way we expect, and then we'll kind of, whoops. Why did we have these in there? Okay, cool. So again, the view functionality is working exactly as it was before. Now I just want to kind of talk about, see if anybody has any questions about this sort of syntax, what we're doing with the square brackets. So this is a type of binding. It means that this active task attribute, I want it to be bound to this active task attribute that's inside of the actual component.ts. There's a lot of dead silence here. Does anybody have any questions about this or issues with this? Because I feel like that could cause some confusion.
Where's the one in the bracket is coming from the HTML, right? Or
Which bracket's coming from the HTML? This right here?
yeah.
You can just put it in back to test.
Well, so what this is connecting to right here is this is connecting to the input of our show task component.
Okay.
So we said inside of our show task component, we want to accept this attribute called active task.
Okay.
So that's what this is connecting to right here.
Okay. So the square bracket active task is connecting to our show task component, and then the active task in quotes is based off of.
This is the one that's inside the app.component.ts. Yeah. In fact, let's change these names a little bit to make it a little bit less confusing.
Okay.
So let's go inside the show task component, and let's say instead of active task, let's say it takes in a selected task. Okay, so if I change that there, I also need to change it inside the template too. So this is now going to be selected task. Oops. Okay, and then inside my app component, I'll say instead of the active task, we're going to say selected task. Okay, and then we'll just refresh it. Same thing. So again, what's happening is my subcomponent, which is show task, is accepting an input of called selected task, and by putting it inside these square brackets there, I'm binding it to whatever the value of the current active task is. Okay, so if I change my current active task, it means that what's being passed to my subcomponent will also change. Okay, so this is one-way binding. We're only binding the information that's going down to the subcomponent versus the two-way binding that we saw inside the form, because in that case I can modify the form from my component.ts, but I can also modify it from the HTML too. So it's bound in both places. Questions on this?
Is there
Yes,
any way we can do a one-way binding for our forms? So like right now, we can change the component, the object in our component to change whatever's on the form,
Yeah.
and we can do it the other way around. But then I understand that's helpful when doing edits because we want to pre-populate information. But I
Sure.
feel like for create a new task, we don't really need the two-way binding because we're only sending information to our component. That's a one-way action.
Well, here's one reason why you still may want it. So inside, so let's look at our form submission one other time. So let's say I successfully submitted the form, what else might I want to do with the form now that I've created this new task? Do I want that form to still have all the information of the task that I just created?
Right.
Probably want to clear it out, right? So we can actually do that inside here using the two-way data binding. So I can just say this dot new task again is just going to be this object that has all these things. So we'll say title, description, completed, false, right? Okay, so that would be a nice user experience. So if I refresh this here, and then we insert a third task, so we'll say third task, third description, and this time I'll say it's completed. Submit that there. Now that's pretty nice, right? It emptied out the form for me, and then it got added there. So that's just sort of a small little user experience thing so that they're not stuck with the previous inputs that they already had, right? Any other questions about what we covered here today?
When you did the ngIf, could you just do ngIf active task? Same thing at the end of the HTML.
Yeah, that would actually work just as well because basically it should coerce this into a Boolean. So if active task at the time was equal to null, then it would return false and it wouldn't show it, right? Yeah, that would work just as well. And we can do it just to prove that it'll be fine. So again, if I refresh this, we're not seeing anything at the bottom because it was null in the beginning. Still works the same way. Yeah, so just as well. All right, thumbs on subcomponents. Good, 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 good. All right, cool.
Do we have to use subcomponents on the test?
Do you have to use the what?
Subcomponents on the test.
They won't be subcomponents, but they will be components that are connected to a specific route.
Sub route.
Yeah, so when we cover routing tomorrow, we'll see how we can link up a specific component with a specific route.
If we're one more question, this is more from a design standpoint for CSS. If you added say one of the subcomponents to show up in a different part.
Hey guys, hold up.
Like if I wanted to give just any CSS styling that
Okay.
sends that subcomponent to a different part of the screen, would that work?
Do you mean if I just wanted to apply some CSS specifically to the subcomponent?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would do it inside my subcomponent here has its own CSS, right?
Right.
So I would add that right in here. So if I wanted to give the subcomponent a border or something like that, so let's just call it dot task, and then we'll just say border is what? I don't know. 3 pixels, solid, green. Yeah, nice and garish, right? And then we'll do padding of 15 pixels. And then inside my show task component, I could just surround this with the div. So if you guys want a shortcut on Macs, it would be Command-Shift-P, and then you can go wrap with abbreviation. Kind of nice, right? And then we'll say class equals task. And real quick, if we go like this, view that guy, you'll see we're getting our styling, and then if we note in here, the class has been linked.
Okay. If that so what about you put styling for class or for task
Inside the app.component?
Yeah, is that going to also apply to your
They should be isolated by components. So if I pull this out of here, I don't believe that would work the way that you're asking. So if I put this inside app.component, Let's try that again.
Okay. So that if I
Yeah.
wanted to control
So the styling is going to be controlled on a component basis.
okay. So you'd have to put that subtask inside of the div and then style that
Right.
div that has okay.
Exactly.
Because sometimes my root style sheet overrides my component style sheet. Because they're eventually rendered on my oh actually not child component. Sorry. It's child route. If I have a child route, it'll like override my component style sheet.
Okay.
One thing that we could do is we could check to see what the style sheets that are being loaded are. So if I refresh this, whoops. Let's see what oh jeez, this is so bad. I can't even seem to get inside here.
Can't just click on the CSS tab.
Yeah, we could do, all right, we could do that. Yeah, that's a good call. So let's look in the elements inside the head here. So these were created, they're actually not loading CSS files. It's just creating these style mappings, right? Source mapping. Yeah, see, I think that's being, so basically that's being handled by JavaScript. So see here where we have styles.js. So that should be taking the styles mappings that we had up at the top of the page and actually mapping them properly to the components. So that's why we would need to do that styling on the component level rather than, you know, on the full app level.
Right.
All right, we good? Any other questions before we break?
Yeah,
Assignments?
Little conceptual diagram I made.
Can I stop the video?
Yeah, you can
Okay, cool. All right.